My husband laughed when the managing partner asked what I did for a living. Not a polite chuckle. A full, leaning back, clinking his glass laugh. She handles logistics for a school board, he said, and then added, before I could breathe, which basically means she makes sure the janitors show up on time. The table erupted. I smiled, lifted my sparkling water, and thought about the USB drive sitting in my coat pocket. In 45 minutes, every named partner at that table would have a very different reason to remember my name. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It started the way it always does. Not with a dramatic discovery. Not with lipstick on a collar or a stranger's perfume. It started with an iPad notification. We shared a family plan. His idea, actually he liked the efficiency of a shared Apple account, said it made it easier to track family expenses. What he forgot, or perhaps never fully understood, was that shared accounts share everything, including the photo stream. I was sitting at the kitchen island on a Tuesday morning in February, our daughter eating her oatmeal across from me, when a photo synced that my husband had taken the night before. A restaurant I didn't recognize, a bottle of red wine I hadn't shared, and a hand unmistakably female, resting across the tablecloth toward his. He'd meant to take the photo for an expense receipt and had accidentally captured more of the frame than he intended. I closed the app before my daughter could see my face change. I'm a coordinator for the Durham Region District School Board. I manage schedules for 4 elementary schools, supply teachers, facility maintenance, special ed support rotations. People at my husband's firm found this amusing in the gentle, condescending way that Bay Street people find most things outside their orbit amusing. My husband had stopped mentioning what I did at firm events about 2 years into his associate career. By the time he made senior associate, I had become, in his introductions, simply his wife. What no one at those events understood was that coordinating the logistics of 4 schools with 900 students, 11 custodians, and a rotating cast of 40 supply teachers had taught me things that no MBA program covers. I knew how to track patterns across complex systems. I knew how to document discrepancies without tipping anyone off. I knew how to be completely invisible in a room while noticing everything in it. After the photo, I started noticing everything. The first thing I did was create a new email address under my maiden name, accessing it only on my personal phone with cellular data, never our home Wi-Fi. Into that inbox, I began forwarding anything that seemed useful. His Amex statements, which he foolishly had set to paperless and routed through our shared Gmail, showed dinners for 2 at Canoe and Aloe on nights he'd claimed to be in client meetings downtown. A Yorkville hotel appearing twice in 1 month. A spa package at a boutique on King Street West that I had certainly never received. I didn't confront him. Not yet. The photo alone was explainable. The receipts were suggestive, not conclusive. My husband was a lawyer. He would dismantle circumstantial evidence the way he dismantled opposing counsel's arguments methodically, pleasantly, and completely. I needed more. The woman in the photo, I recognized eventually, though it took me 3 weeks to place her. She was a junior associate at his firm, someone I'd met at the previous year's holiday party at the Fairmont Royal York. She'd been friendly, bright-eyed, recently relocated from Calgary. She had a husband of her own and a little boy who had just turned 2. I'd admired a photo on her phone that night. A gap-toothed grin, dark curly hair, and a single prominent dimple on the left cheek. My husband had that same dimple. So did our daughter. I spent 4 nights lying awake doing the math. She had returned from maternity leave 11 months ago. Her son was 2. I thought about a conference my husband had attended in Calgary 3 years ago. 3 days, I'd barely heard from him. He said the hotel Wi-Fi was unreliable. He'd come home distracted and strangely kind, bringing me a box of chocolates from the airport like a man managing his own guilt. The dates aligned. I needed to be certain before I moved. Certainty, in my experience, is not something you feel. It's something you build, piece by piece, until the structure holds its own weight. The firm hosted a family fun day every August at a conservation area outside the city. My husband always attended, networking in the guise of relaxation. I volunteered to help organize the children's activities, which no one found surprising. The coordinator's wife, of course she'd help with the games table. I brought water bottles for the kids. I watched her son run through the splash pad, that dimple flashing every time he laughed. When he came to the table for a cup of water, I handed it to him personally, watched him drink, and when he set it down to chase after another child, I sealed it in a small Ziploc bag I'd tucked into my shorts pocket. A colleague of mine had a sister who worked for a private genetics lab in Mississauga. I'd learned this during a staff lunchroom conversation I'd filed away without knowing why. I reached out through a careful chain, a mutual friend, a casual mention of a family health question, a referral. The science was not complicated. The waiting was. 3 weeks later, I had my answer. I did not cry when I read the result. I had been so methodical for so long that the confirmation felt less like a wound and more like the final piece clicking into place. I filed the report in the encrypted folder on my phone, added it to the growing dossier I kept backed up in 2 separate cloud accounts under names that had nothing to do with me, and I made dinner. Chicken and roasted sweet potatoes. My daughter's favorite. I had been sleeping beside this man for 9 years. I had followed him from Halifax when he got the articling position in Toronto, leaving behind my family, my friends, the city I'd grown up in. I had taken the school board job because its hours were compatible with school pickup, because we'd agreed one of us needed flexibility, and because he had needed me to believe that his career was the family's career. I had made that sacrifice so completely that I had almost forgotten it was a sacrifice at all. He had laughed at me for it for years, gently at first, then at dinner parties, then in front of his managing partner and 6 named partners at a $120 per head restaurant in downtown Toronto. She handles logistics, basically means she makes sure the janitors show up on time. I'd been making sure things ran on time for 9 years. His dry cleaning picked up on Tuesdays so it was ready by Thursday. His mother's birthday remembered, card bought, reservation booked at her favorite Amex bistro. His daughter dropped at school, picked up, taken to swimming lessons and dentist appointments and the ear specialist when she kept getting infections, all without a single disruption to his billable hours. Every single mechanism of his life ran smoothly and invisibly because I had built it that way. I had also, in the past 8 months, been quietly building something else. The billing irregularities had taken me the longest to find, and they were the piece I was most proud of. My husband handled a number of corporate files with significant expense budgets. I had access to our household accounts and nothing more, or so he believed. What he'd forgotten was that his firm sent a quarterly newsletter to partners' spouses, a practice from an older era that no one had bothered to discontinue. The newsletter included updates on firm business, charitable initiatives, and occasionally, client highlights, cross-referencing those client names against his Amex charges for hotel rooms and restaurant dinners charges. I was certain had been submitted for reimbursement on the corresponding client files had taken me 4 months of quiet Saturday mornings while he played squash at the Granite Club. I was not a lawyer, but I had coordinated 900 students across 4 schools with a combined budget under $2 million. I understood institutional accounting well enough to know what improper expense allocation looked like. And I knew that the Law Society of Ontario had a specific complaints process for exactly this kind of professional misconduct. I had drafted my submission to the Law Society 6 weeks before the partner announcement dinner. The dinner itself was held at a private event space on the 34th floor of a tower on Bay Street, a firm tradition going back 30 years. 42 people, including 6 partners' spouses. I wore the same navy dress I always wore to firm events, modest, forgettable, appropriate. My husband had once said I had a gift for dressing like furniture. He was ebullient that evening, more physical than usual, his hand finding my back frequently in the way of men who need an audience for their tenderness. He introduced me to the new recruits with a warmth that surprised me, until I realized the managing partner was within earshot and my husband had always been exquisitely calibrated to his surroundings. "She is the reason I function," he told one young associate, and for a half-second I felt something old and complicated move through my chest. Then he added, laughing, "I genuinely cannot find my own dry cleaning without her," and everyone laughed, and the moment passed. She was there too, seated 3 spots down the table on the opposite side. Her husband was beside her, a quiet man who worked in municipal planning, who shook my hand too firmly in the way of men who are slightly uncomfortable at events where they don't know the language. I watched him from across the table throughout the appetizer course. He had no idea. The particular obliviousness of a trusting spouse is something I recognized with the sharp, specific pang of recent personal experience. Our daughter was at home with my mother, who had driven down from Halifax for the week. I had told her it was a special occasion. She had asked if I was all right. Mothers know. The managing partner rose to speak after the main course. He was a man of practiced confidence, the kind of senior partner who filled every room he entered without appearing to try. He spoke about the firm's record year, about the Henderson acquisition file that had anchored their Q4 earnings, about the character and commitment required to reach the partnership level. I excused myself quietly during the applause following his first remarks. The woman beside me assumed I was heading to the washroom. The managing partner did not pause. My husband did not look up. I walked to the hallway, found a quiet alcove near the elevator bank, and opened my phone. I had 3 emails queued in drafts. The first was addressed to the Law Society of Ontario's complaints intake, with the billing documentation attached. The second was addressed to all 6 named partners at the firm, with a shorter summary and supporting evidence. The third was addressed to her husband directly, with the DNA results, the hotel records, and a single sentence. "I'm sorry you're learning this way, but you deserve to know." I had also written a 4th note. A short one, addressed to my husband's parents in Fredericton, who had always been kind to me and who deserved to hear from me directly rather than through the wreckage. That one I had already sent from a Tim Hortons on my lunch break 2 days earlier, giving them enough time to process it before tonight. I pressed send on all 3 remaining drafts. Then I stood in the alcove and breathed. Through the glass doors I could see the city, 34 floors below, the CN Tower lit up orange against a March sky. Somewhere across the city my daughter was probably making my mother read the same picture book for the 3rd consecutive night. She had my husband's dimple and my stubbornness, and she was going to be completely fine. I took the elevator down. The cascade began, as I had calculated, approximately 50 minutes later. I know this because I was sitting in a Tim Hortons on Front Street when the first call came from a number I didn't recognize, one of the junior partners, as I later learned. I let it go to voicemail. I ordered a medium double-double, which I had not allowed myself in months because my husband had recently begun commenting on my food choices, and I sat at a window table and watched the streetcars run. The managing partner had been mid-sentence. I know this from what my brother-in-law told me 3 days later. He had paused to accept a refilled glass of wine from the server when the first phone vibrated. Then a second. Then, in the particular way of a room full of people with good professional instincts, the silence shifted. Someone checked their screen. Someone else followed. By the time the 4th phone had lit up, the managing partner had stopped speaking entirely. My husband apparently looked around the table before looking at his own phone. He registered the expressions of the people looking at theirs first, the way color drains from a face, the way someone's posture changes when they read something they cannot process standing up, and he understood that something catastrophic had happened before he understood that he was the catastrophe. Her husband received his email at the table as well. He was not a dramatic man by nature. He read it twice, set his phone down very carefully on the white tablecloth, and excused himself without a word to anyone. He did not return. He drove directly home, collected his son from their babysitter, and sent a text to his own parents in Edmonton. He was a thorough, quiet person who handled a crisis the same way I did. I respected him enormously for it, from a distance. My husband called me 11 times in the first hour. I did not answer. He left 2 voicemails. I did not listen to them until a week later, sitting in my lawyer's office at a firm on Yonge Street that specialized in family law. The first voicemail was defensive, then confused, then something approaching fear. The second was quieter. He said my name twice, and then stopped talking, and I could hear the particular ambient sound of the Bay Street elevator bank behind him, that low hum of a building full of people who were done with him for the evening. The Law Society acknowledged my submission within 48 hours. The partners' meeting, I was told later by someone who had been in the room, lasted until past midnight. I stayed at a hotel in Leslieville for 3 nights. I'd booked it under my maiden name 2 weeks earlier, paying cash at a pharmacy for a prepaid card to hold the reservation. It was a small, clean place that served a decent breakfast and didn't ask questions. I called my daughter every morning and every night. I told her Mummy was on a work trip and that Grandma's pancakes were probably better than mine anyway. She agreed enthusiastically and asked if she could get a fish. On the 4th morning, I drove home. My brother-in-law was parked in front of the house. He'd driven up from Hamilton the previous night and had apparently been waiting since 7 a.m. He was a straightforward person, my brother-in-law, a high school phys ed teacher who had never entirely understood how to talk to me but had always been genuinely decent. He got out of his car when he saw me pull up and he said, "I owe you an apology. I knew something was wrong. I should have said something. I looked at him for a moment. When did you know? His expression answered before he did, long enough. I nodded. I'm not angry with you, I said, and meant it mostly. But if he ever treats someone the way he treated me, I need you to say something. Not for me. For whoever she is. He nodded, his hands in his jacket pockets. The particular posture of a man absorbing a correction he knows he deserves. My parents-in-law called that evening. My mother-in-law cried through most of the conversation and told me 3 times that I was a good woman, which made me want to cry as well. Though I waited until after we hung up. They were not responsible for who their son had become, and I told them so. We spoke every week for the next 2 months, and they drove up for my daughter's spring recital, and they continue to drive up now, because whatever had collapsed in the architecture of that marriage, I had no intention of taking her grandparents from her. The question of her was the one I had handled first and most carefully. My daughter understood that her father had made mistakes and that she would live with me and see him regularly. I used plain language, no drama, no editorializing. I had a child psychologist she began seeing on Tuesdays, a warm woman in the Beaches neighborhood who specialized in family transition. My daughter cried for 3 weeks and then one afternoon she asked if she could get a betta fish and name him Gordon after her teacher, and I said yes immediately, and I took that as a meaningful sign. My husband's access schedule was set through mediation. He moved into a condo on Parliament Street and took the coffee maker, which was fine because I replaced it with a better one. He called more often in the first month than he had in the last year of our marriage. I was civil on the phone for our daughter's sake. For the most part, so was he. Her son, the little boy with the dimple, went to live primarily with his father, which had been arranged between the 2 families without my involvement. I heard this through a mutual connection. Her husband had taken a position with the city's planning department in Ottawa and relocated with his son within 2 months of the dinner. What happened between the 2 of them after that was not my story to carry. 3 weeks after I came home from the hotel, the managing partner called me. Not my husband's managing partner. My husband was no longer employed there in any capacity, his partnership bid withdrawn and his associate contract terminated pending the Law Society investigation. The call came from a woman who ran a legal operations consulting practice that did contract work for several mid-sized Bay Street firms. She had heard about me, she said, from one of the named partners who had, apparently, taken a moment in the aftermath of the worst evening of his professional year to notice that the documentation I had assembled was more thoroughly organized than anything his litigation team had produced in months. She asked if I'd consider doing a 6-week contract for her. Administrative systems audit for a family law firm in North York that was scaling quickly and drowning in scheduling inefficiencies. I told her I needed to think about it overnight. I thought about it for about 40 minutes and then sent her an email saying yes. That contract became a second contract. The second became a referral. By September I had 4 clients and had formally registered a business under my maiden name. I continued at the school board part-time for another year, partly for the benefits, partly because I was good at it and the people there had been kind to me during a difficult stretch, and you don't leave people in a lurch for no reason. My husband received a formal reprimand from the Law Society and is currently working as legal counsel for a pharmaceutical company in Mississauga. He is not a partner. He sends birthday cards on time and shows up for every scheduled visit and coaches our daughter's Saturday soccer team, which is, I suppose, a version of accountability. She loves soccer, she is fine. Gordon the fish lived for 14 months, which is apparently excellent for a betta. I think about that evening sometimes, not the dinner, not the emails, but the elevator ride down from that 34th floor. The moment the doors closed and I was alone, heading towards street level, the city spread out behind me through the glass. I had spent 9 years organizing everything around someone else's ambition, making the mechanisms invisible so that he could take up space without friction. And in doing all of that, I had become invisible too, not because I lacked presence but because I had directed everything I had outward, toward his calendar, his dry cleaning, his career trajectory, his image. What my husband never grasped, not in 9 years, was that the skills required to manage a complex system invisibly are the same skills required to take one apart. Precision, patience, an eye for the details that other people are too busy being important to notice. He thought I was logistics. He was right. He just didn't understand what that meant. On the morning of my daughter's school photo day this past October, I dropped her off at 8:15, Drove to my office on Gerrard Street, a 2-room space I share with a bookkeeper and a graphic designer, made a cup of coffee, and reviewed the week's client files. The window faces a maple that had gone full red. My daughter had worn her green dress and had, against all advice, insisted on attempting her own ponytail. I thought about how my husband used to joke that I was basically a human calendar. He meant it as a diminishment. He had no idea that the person who keeps track of everything is also the person who knows where everything is buried. And there is nothing basic about that. If this story stayed with you, hit the like button and let me know in the comments what was the moment that got you. Was it the family fun day, the emails going out during the speech, or something else? Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. And remember, the person in the room who seems to be managing the details is always paying attention to more than the details.